So today's event is focused on our education, and we're excited to get started. But first of all, a few announcements. So first of all, for anyone who's new or needs a reminder, Our Ladies is a global organization which is dedicated to promoting gender diversity in the R community through meetups like this one and through mentorship. And we want to create a friendly and safe environment. We have a code of conduct that's available at the link on screen. Our Ladies Philly manages a directory of speakers and mentors, and we invite you to join if you'd like. If you're seeking mentorship, feel free to reach out to potential mentors who are part of our directory. And if you're having trouble matching yourself with someone, please reach out to the organizers because we can help facilitate. We have a YouTube channel. This is where we post recordings of our meetups. And we also have a Slack workspace where you can come with your art problems and yeah, find community. Okay, upcoming events. We have a virtual happy hour scheduled for March 4th. This will be a chance to socialize with fellow Our Ladies Philly members and try out some fun icebreakers. We also have a datathon coming in March and April. We're very excited about that. And Carla Fetich, one of the Our Ladies Philly organizers, as well as representatives from the Judge Accountability Table Group are going to provide more information about that in a second. In June, we're planning an event of lightning talks, and we're looking for speakers. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit about some research that you have been completing using R, or give us an overview of your favorite R package. Okay, and next up, we have an opportunity for you to learn a bit about the package development process. So Jake Riley, who's one of our past presenters, would like to get some feedback on a new package that he's developing called Headliner. He's looking for volunteers who'd be interested in attending 1 or 2 meetings, providing critical feedback, and essentially test driving the package before he submits it to CRAN, which is the main repository for our packages. The package Headliner, it offers the ability for users to write expressive sentences about data trends and is geared towards those who are regularly writing reports or creating plots. So if you're interested in getting involved with this opportunity, please complete the Google form, which is linked on this slide. All right. Okay, for the next slide, I'm going to hand the mic over to Carla and I think Katja from JAT.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm super excited to announce our hackathon, well, we call it Datathon for this year. So we try to organize one of these every year. Those of you who have participated in the past know it's usually a 6-week process where we work with a partner to examine and explore some real-world data, get our hands dirty, and help our partner with data analysis, building models, building visualizations, whatever they may need help with, and whatever we want to try and do with the data as well. So this year, I'm very excited to announce that we have partnered with the Judge Accountability Table, who's a local group in Philadelphia that will make data available for us to explore judicial patterns in the Philadelphia courts. So they will make some data available from public court dockets. It's going to be a sub-sample because the data set is quite extensive, but they will need our help to explore, to visualize, to really understand the patterns that we may see in the judicial system. And we have Katja Perez here with us from JAT. I'm going to ask her to unmute and tell us a few words about what JAT is doing and how we can help.
Hi, Carla. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today. Yes, I'm Katia Perez. I coordinate the judge accountability table. And so with the data team, I know that together y'all are organizing the datathon. I keep reading hackathon in the emails where I get the updates. It's funny.
Yeah, we use both.
Interchangeably, got it. So yeah, what we're trying to do, the information that we're trying to figure out for the judge accountability table is, I know like one of the things, and right, I'm going to give different perspectives just because like me, my background is more in organizing, and I know that there's also a lot of data that's specific to those who are more versed with, reading the court dockets, which would be the lawyers at the table. Love them. So I'm going to give more information on the electoral stuff that we're trying to figure out for our C4 members, right? So, and I'll mention why electoral. So basically, the judge accountability table started because in the, in fighting the carceral system and fighting, an unjust criminal law system, um, the judicial system, especially here in local politics in Philly, there wasn't much attention around it. A lot of people don't pay attention to judicial races. A lot of folks don't even know that in Philadelphia, you actually do get to vote for judges for the Court of Common Pleas and for the municipal court. And this is important because in the fight, for mass liberation and the fight to, and we are abolitionists, I am an abolitionist, in that fight to bring more justice to our communities, to marginalized folks, the judicial system was not being paid attention to. So the JAP, primarily one of the first objectives it's had is to increase political education, public education, on the fact that, hey, these judges are actually, these are elected seats. And it's to mobilize those who are directly impacted, those that are most marginalized, Black and brown people here in Philadelphia, the ones who are most likely to end up in front of those judges, right? Those judges choosing their destiny for them, those judges then sending them either, to be incarcerated or sentencing them with anything else. So primarily, number one, it's public education, right? These are elected seats. We need to figure out who are these people that are going for these seats because they're deciding for those in our community. So with the datathon, and that's why I'm mentioning elections. With the datathon, what we're trying to figure out are trying to pinpoint which are judges that are up for retention in November. That a lot of people don't even pay attention to the retention elections, especially in an off year like this year, right? 2021. There's going to be low voter turnout. That means that judges who have been making horrible decisions for our community, judges that have been setting, not setting, judges that have been selecting even magistrates who set bails, right? That have been selecting magistrates that you set high bails, that these judges have been harming our communities, are going to stay in those seats. So I know one of the things that we're trying to look at are, I think there are about 17 judges up for retention this November. And one of the things we're looking at with this datathon is seeing what they're basically how they've been as judges, right? Do they set super high bails? Are there biases different things like that we can catch, so that we can make sure that by in November, those bad judges that are, doing the most harm to our communities, that we are able to identify them, and then for our C4 groups at the judge accountability table to be able to have a campaign around, hey, we cannot reelect this judge because they're causing harm to our communities. So I'm giving more of that background. Hey, this is it's the data that's being collected. Again, it's collecting those numbers that we need in our fight for justice is what I'm saying. So I am super thankful that this is happening. We've been trying to figure out ways since 2019. We've even spoken to folks at the public defenders. They were going to provide data and all of this, and it's just been barrier after barrier to try to get this information to do this work, right? To do this work to educate the public on the judges that are up in those seats. So thank you so much to this group for organizing with our data group at the judge accountability table and for helping us make this happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katya, and for sharing the data with us. So this is really an opportunity for us and for our members to work with data, real world data, get experience with what it means to deal with messy data, not the tidy stuff that you find when you learn R, and also make a difference, contribute to the community. So I'm very excited to make this happen. So our kickoff event is going to be Wednesday, March 17th, 6 to 8 p.m. is the usual time frame for our events. So we will post more information on our meetup page and on a GitHub page as we get closer to the event. So stay tuned. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Katya and Carla. We're really excited about the Datathon event. Okay. Yeah, turning to today's event, from learner to teacher. So we're delighted to be joined by 3 expert panelists to discuss the topic of our education. And thank you to our panelists for volunteering their time to this event. So Nyame-Mensah is a postdoc and research associate in the School of Social Policy and Practice and the Graduate School of Education at UPenn. Her current work rethinks whether and how quantitative computational methods can contribute to a more equitable understanding of marginalized children's and families' learning and development. Amma is passionate about empowering people to use data for social analysis, as well as critiquing data and data technologies. And when not working, Amma can be found tinkering with data and designing visualizations. So Amma will be speaking first, and then Cass Wilkinson-Saldana will be up next. So Cass helps learners, researchers, and communities to engage meaningfully and critically with data. They currently work as a data instructional specialist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and they teach Introduction to R courses at Yeshiva University. Previously, Cass worked at the Social Science and Geospatial, worked as the Social Science and Geospatial Data Librarian at Cornell University. And as a data educator and data librarian, Cass participates and collaborates in open source ecosystems, especially in the domains of open science, digital scholarship, and civic data. They also strive to advocate for justice in worker and learner communities. And then finally, we'll hear from Sylvia. So Sylvia Canelon is a postdoctoral research scientist in biomedical informatics at the University of Pennsylvania. She uses data science in the public and population health fields and is particularly interested in leveraging electronic health record data to study reproductive health outcomes. Sylvia is formally trained as a biomedical engineer and is an RStudio certified Tidyverse instructor. She loves community organizing and is passionate about our education as a way to help build power in her communities. So the way we'll organize the event is in the first half, each panelist is going to share a perspective on our education. We'll take a 5-minute break, chance for everyone to stretch their legs, grab a glass of water, and then the second half of the event will be discussion-based. For taking your questions, we're trying something new, which is Slido. So through Slido, you can go to the Q&A section and you can add your questions. And what's nice about this is that it has upvoting functionality, so you can look at other questions that audience members have submitted and upvote the ones that you'd like us to ask the panelists. And we also have some questions that we've already prepared based on suggestions provided by meetup registrants. So if you're having any trouble with any of this, please let us know in the chat. But without further ado, I will hand off to Amma.
Great, thanks so much for that. So I'm gonna share my screen and start my video just to say hi, but then I'm gonna turn off my video just so you're not staring at me, but rather just staring at my slides. So, hello everyone. Okay. And thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm just going to keep my video on for this first slide, just as I introduce myself. So my name is Nyame-Mensah, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow, a research associate, as well as a data consultant. And so I really have a diverse background, I would say, that lends itself quite well to both data science and policy work. So I completed my undergraduate degree in economics. I also have a master's degree in urban affairs and public policy, and I completed my PhD in social welfare a couple of years ago. And so most of the time when I say that to folks, the response that I get is, so what the heck does that actually have to do with data, right? And so nothing on the surface, but I've really been fortunate enough over the course of my career to, gain and further develop skills in data science and programming. And so before joining the Penn community, I served as a researcher at a nonprofit center in DC that was really a hub for data collection and analysis, and for promoting and understanding why there is a lack of diversity in STEM education and in computing sciences and computing fields more specifically. And so since joining the Penn community, I've had the pleasure of working with numerous professors, organizations, and agencies to improve their ability to not just use data, but also understand data. And so this has required expertise, not just in statistical modeling, which is what a lot of my background is in, but also in data reporting, data cleaning, and data processing. And so I also regularly, for example, lecture at Penn and mentor students. And so most of my work and research centers around helping teams think about how data and methods that are used to analyze data influence and affect the growth and development of children and families, as well as affects the well-being of communities. And so this could mean anything from developing new methods for reframing how we talk about and analyze a topic, to thinking about what data are needed to help a team do their job better rather. And so really a large part of the decisions that I've made throughout my journey and my career trajectory have been rooted in the belief that it's not just enough to be, what folks call sort of a data person. You also need to understand data and context. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video now. Okay. So when it comes to thinking about, oops, I think I missed the slide there, that's what I thought. So programming and learning programming, and R in particular, one thing that always jumps out at me is the fact that programming is really just a creative process. And so I remember this past summer, I was sort of engaged in this online spar with folks on Twitter on how best to ease people into programming, right? And in programming in R specifically, and particularly for folks who've never programmed before. And it was really an interesting conversation, as most of those Twitter conversations tend to go. Some sort of, devolve into craziness. Others, can really bring about some interesting sort of insights. And so one interesting response that I got to this question was that one person shared, when they teach R, they generally try to have people experience a problem before presenting a solution. And so I think it's hard to determine whether that is an inherently good or bad approach to teaching programming, but it really got me thinking about, how educators, data supervisors, really anyone who mentors or teaches programming, how are we really preparing the next generation of programmers? And it also made me reflect on my own experiences about what I was told, what were the sort of best ways to teach R. Should R be taught as an environment for programming, or really just as a tool for analysis or visualization? And when I say that, I mean, should educators focus more on building students' programming chops, or should they really just encourage students to complete small tasks? And so on the one hand, learning how to accomplish small but powerful tasks is important, and is really attractive, particularly among folks who don't have a programming background. It can sometimes unfortunately lead to a narrow focus on how to solve a problem. And so one of the things that typically comes up for me from my students is they sort of think that, if they're only taught how to do something one way, then that is the only way that it can be done. And so I really try to emphasize that programming is really a creative process. And I vaguely remember reading somewhere this definition of programming that really resonated with me, where they said, programming is a creative process that enables program solving, human expression, and creation of knowledge. And so part of the reason why that definition really resonated with me, particularly those first 2 points about being creative and enables problem solving, right, is because some folks will have you believe that programming is a process of like memorization and recall, but it really isn't. You know, all programmers develop their own style of writing. Some prefer writing more verbose code or opt for clarity or function. And so for me, either way, programming involves discovery. So you really need to learn some base information, and then the creativity sort of pops out, right? So you're developing your own sense of style and then applying that information. And then on the other side, when it comes to teaching, so my sort of programming, and this is really universal, not just to R, but I apply this most vigorously in courses that I teach on R or that have R programming components. And my teaching pedagogy for R programming really has 3 critical features, not just a fancy way of saying my approach to teaching. And so the first sort of feature is show, just don't tell. And part of this actually comes out of sort of tradition. I'm sure many of you can remember in grade school where you had show and tell, right? So like some kid would come to class with their favorite toy and like tell you about it and like who bought it for them and why it was special to them. And then they would show you like all the cool things the toy can do. And then all of you would like crowd around the toy and like be super excited. But what I would always think is, you know, well, imagine if your classmate only ever described their toy, but never actually showed you what it did or like all the cool features of it, right? And so that would make for a really boring and ineffective show and tell. And so the same for me goes for when you're teaching someone a new skill or topic, coaching a client for data, right? And so it's really not enough to just describe the steps involved. You really have to show them the ins and outs of how it works. And so for me, that's really important when it comes to teaching programming and programming R in particular. The second sort of critical feature is explaining the context, not just the code. And so with this particular feature, you know, it seems like it could be really specific just to professionals who are teaching coding or educators or trainers who are delivering programming workshops. But when I first started teaching, I was unfortunately really hyper-focused on making sure students had the code they needed to complete a task. And so when I was teaching or delivering a workshop, I spent almost 99% of the time writing code and making sure students wrote the code down, and only 1% or even less percent, you know, of the time explaining what the code actually meant and did. And so not surprising, that did not go over well. Many of my teaching evaluations were not great. And it was because, you know, they didn't really understand what was going on. And so much like with that first, you know, critical feature, you know, showing and don't just tell them, you really need to explain what's going on, particularly for folks who don't have a programming background, or if you just happen to be in a course where the course instructor is insistent on you using R and not RStudio, which is a little bit more friendly in terms of its graphical user interface. And so you really need to sort of explain what's going on. You need to, you know, talk about what the code is doing. You need to talk about the features of the functions. All of that's really important, not just on the teaching side, but also for making sure that students are actually getting a good understanding of what it actually means to be an R programmer. And so my final critical feature is encourage active learning and play. And so this really comes out of a lot of the work that I do around children and families. And so in every sort of course I do, and in particular with the courses that I do that have an R component, I always encourage active learning and play. And so again, here, when I first started teaching, I was also really afraid of deviating from like a perfectly crafted lesson plan. And it made students actually sort of afraid to try new things. And it also made my lectures really boring. And so again, the students definitely called me out on it. And I've realized, you know, when it comes to learning anything, you know, nothing's ever going to be perfect, and nor is any program that you create ever going to be perfect. So when teaching or mentoring students now, and even when folks ask me, you know, how to become a more confident programmer, I encourage them just to play. And so this is a very similar concept called experiential learning. And that's just a really fancy way of saying, you know, you're practicing how to do something and you're learning it by doing it. And so it really encourages folks to gain firsthand on experience, in this case with R, rather than learning it through someone else's experience as it's being told to them, right, through like a lecture or even in a textbook. And so I incorporate this form of learning in the classroom as well as coding live with students. And it's really great for students because they get to see that, as an example, even professionals mess up. And like those are like the great sweet spots, because those are the learning moments where they learn that, you know, R is always a sort of, or learning how to code in R and being in our program is a developmental process. You're always going to be improving on your skills. There's always something new that you can be doing. And so that's the sort of last feature. So that's all that I have.
Thank you, Emma. So if you have questions, please add them to Slido Q&A, and we'll move straight on to Cass, and then come back around for questions at the end. Thank you.
Great. Hey, everyone. Amma, thank you so much. I scribbled so many notes down on the back of this envelope. So many good ideas here. And yeah, what I'm going to share actually kind of complements that. It's going to talk maybe about another part of this world of learning, which is kind of how we participate in communities of practice, or honestly, spaces like we're in right now in Our Ladies. So I'm going to share my screen. Forgot to do that. I'm going to start with this idea that we're all learners and educators. We take turns between the two. We have both of those modes in us. And that's like a nice idea, right? But I'm going to be a little more specific about how you can think in those terms, and how thinking about the ways that we teach along the way can help us be a little more deliberate in how we engage in our communities. So hi, this is me. I'm Cass. I work, as Amy said at the top, I'm working at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I help teach different types of data science related workshops and help organize webinars. I do some direct instruction, and I do probably a little bit more now capacity building. So kind of keeping education programs up and running and having lots of conversations with my colleagues and trying to problem solve around how do we kind of cultivate a community where people can be using R and other reproducible tools and methods in their everyday science and research and practice. So where I come from originally is actually public libraries. I did an AmeriCorps program right out of school, and I focused on, so in this AmeriCorps program, it was all about the digital divide and teaching digital literacy in different types of agencies, and a subset of us were in public libraries. And so my first experience when I think about teaching coding or teaching data or teaching software of any kind, I actually think about teaching people to double click and people to use Microsoft Word and some of those initial experiences in this public computer lab, the electronic classroom in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that gave me a real focus initially on just how intimidating computers can feel for all of us, and also how exciting it is when you can work towards your own goals. And I think that even though the tech stacks have changed, the tasks have changed, the focus has changed, it's honestly still just that, right? We're all trying to work towards our goals. We're all trying to figure out what is the next thing I can do. And also we're managing feeling intimidated often, or feeling maybe like we can't quite keep up, or maybe we'll be ready eventually, or I'm interested, but I don't know. Like those are just constant feelings with these tools. And I think seeing that as a through line helps me remember that we're all trying our best, and sometimes relating to that level of comfort and inclusion can be a helpful way to relate to people. I also like pinball and cats. So I'm gonna just quickly for my part here, talk about two modes that I'm in, and that perhaps you all can relate to. One of them is, as I mentioned, I do lead workshops, and I do, you know, when I was in person in my job here, and was helping with a machine learning workshop, you know, so this is people together. I love small clusters of desks where people can work in small groups. But the idea here is that this is a half-day event. We're all gathered together. We're working towards a goal. You know, it's not the exact same thing as like a 4-credit course, but you know, there's requirements, there's people enroll, there's all those expectations. Oh, there's a fire truck. Sorry. And yeah, so also I spent a lot of time in communities of practice, just like this one. So in the R community, there is this great, in the CHOP community, this great R user group called CHOP-R, you know, Code for Philly, Our Ladies. I just did a fellowship with the Recurse Center, which is a basically self-directed, kind of organically organized programmers retreat. And that's influenced some of the ideas I'll share here. Also the Carpentries, and a data librarian focus group on data visualization. So when I think about these communities, I realize that I have a mental model for coming into this community and being a learner or an instructor. And I love coming to events and engaging here. But if you ask me, like, what does learning look like when you're not in the workshop and you're in a community? I feel like I think about connecting to people and learning, but I don't, it's taken me a bit to figure out, how do I actually engage and get the most and contribute to these communities flourishing? And what I've realized is that we spend maybe a semester, maybe 3 months, maybe a couple years or a few years in our formal educational environments. And then we spend a long time in these communities, and we spend a lot of time building up these communities together and sharing resources and kind of creating them together. And I've realized that there's actually a ton of really, really good work that happens to ferry us along what is something that was not as clear to me as a beginner, but now I see a lot of people, go through, and I went through, which is going from that first experience of R or a language, and then going through those intermediate steps. So when you're really working with it over time. And so what I would encourage you to think about in your own learning around data is, one, if you haven't had if you've never experienced R before, or you would like to have that first experience in a guided environment, I think that pedagogically, learning wise, is a brilliant way to move into and have these first experiences with R and with any programming language. And then as you think about your life as a programmer going forward, like, well, we're all in the same boat, whether you've been doing it for 3 months or a year or 10 years or 20 years, we all eventually are in this mode where we're constantly learning and constantly kind of growing in our role. So the question I wanted to kind of bring to you all today is, what are some strategies that can help you approach that time in your communities as a learner and educator? So, today, if you're coming here and you're interested in learning R and you've already done some and you want to keep learning, what I would kind of provoke you is to think about, what does it look like for you to teach as you learn, to be an educator and a learner, and how might that help you grow into your life here? As honestly, we're all in the same boat, and we're all part of growing a vibrant data community together. So what does that look like? So let me be concrete here at the end. Is that I think one of the biggest things, and Amma mentioning on Twitter, I want to overly push Twitter because I am too much on Twitter, but honestly, asking questions in community has been perhaps one of the biggest things for me, is just getting in the habit that when you ask a question in a public space, whether it's a Twitter, it's a Slack, it's a work group, that not only are you learning, how to work through code and answer questions, but you're actually giving everyone else around you a chance to grow relationships within community. When you ask someone a question, other people see you ask that question, people jump in and they experience themselves in a helper role. You can get connected to resources, so you raise the visibility of other projects. I think that asking questions is actually doing really important community work. And I think that it's really helpful to value that. Another is sharing your curiosity, not just your expertise. So in the Recurse Center program I mentioned, over the last 3 months, I was in this program, and there was a real model of sharing presentations once or twice a week, sharing as you go, just trying something. And I think that sometimes we feel like we have to wait until we're an expert to share the most, but I think that we have a ton to share as we go. And just like with the questions, there's a lot of opportunities to share through, if there's a talk, if there's a shorter sort of update you can give. Blog posts are huge, but I really encourage you, again, once you're doing anything with R, just try to write it out, try to share it, and you'd be surprised how much that can actually help everyone and help you. And then the last two here is to basically, consider pair programming. It's a little bit harder in R than some other languages because RStudio doesn't have the easiest interface to code side by side. But Isabella Velasquez has this amazing post on getting Visual Studio Code up and running for sharing coding together. And this is a method for you to work one-on-one with somebody and write something together. Of course, you can also just, tag someone and say, hey, can we Zoom and kind of take turns, or can we talk stuff out? But I would really recommend, this was out of my comfort zone when I first started doing this, but this is a huge, huge way to really gain skills and new experiences as a programmer. And it sounds fancy, pair programming, but really what I mean here is try once or twice just to direct message someone and say, hey, can we talk about this weird problem I have with code? Can I share my screen with you in a call? And again, you'd be surprised how that can help you grow community. And then the last one is an insight from the actual theory around community as practice. And Greg Wilson in Teaching Tech Together talks about this, which is welcoming newcomers into the community. So when you are new and you've been new a bit, so maybe you're old, maybe you're still new, it can feel a little bit like, I'm still learning. Am I ready to really, I'm not ready to raise my hand and say I'm going to lead a workshop. But one thing that you can always do is see the new people coming in and say hi to them, reach out, welcome them in. That helps people feel like they have a connection and can grow the community. And also for you, it helps you understand, oh, I am an Our Lady in this space. I'm an Our human in the Our Lady's world, and I can contribute in this way. So these are things that you probably have done in different versions before that, you know, they're not maybe totally new to you, but I would recommend you think about how each of these helps grow communities and how is in themselves a type of community work that can really help you grow as you move past that very first experience into your life as a community member doing data work. So
thank you so much, Cass. And I think Sylvia's up next.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm really excited to be sharing this space with Amma and Cass and learning from them. So let me get started. Let's do, great, thank you. Okay, so my name is Sylvia Canelon, and I'm a postdoctoral research scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. Specifically, I work in biomedical informatics, and the kind of studies that we do involve analyzing electronic health record data, and that's how we study pregnancy-related outcomes. And I'm also an RStudio certified Tidyverse instructor, and so I got trained as an instructor last year in July, and have just been teaching a little bit since then. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in my next slide. And then what I'll be presenting about today is like some practical advice for designing lessons. And it'll be, I think, helpful for learners as well as educators. So let's dive right in. Okay, so the teaching experiences that I've had so far as an instructor, I've had the fortune of being able to teach Tidyverse basics for Our Lady Chicago, and I also have taught a couple of Sharingen courses. So Sharingen is a package that lets you create really nice slides using R, and I've been able to do that in English and in Spanish. And the Spanish workshop was a little bit challenging for me because I hadn't done that before, and I really realized there were so many technical terms that I had to learn in order to teach R in a different language. That was a really nice experience. And then I've also TA'd quite a few different workshops or courses, and I know that there's some people here on the call that have also participated in these specific teachings with me, and Cass as well. We've collaborated as TAs on some of these courses as well. And so there's, you know, Cass mentioned that the CHOP R community is really great. And one of the things that kind of comes out of CHOP in general is these teaching opportunities for clinicians. And so I've been able to TA a couple of those courses. And I also TA'd a Tidy Models course or workshop given last year for the R Medicine conference. And then I have a lot of learning experiences. So I really love how Cass talked about community as a practice and how we're all learner educators, because I definitely feel that. And while I do have the opportunity to teach every once in a while, I'm mostly a learner. And so this is just a list of the different types of workshops that I've participated in as a learner. And I'm constantly looking for different opportunities to do that. And Our Ladies is a really, really wonderful space for that, really wonderful community to learn in a kind of informal environment that, you know, often provides hands-on experiences and that experiential learning that Amma was talking about earlier. So there's always something to learn, and I just wanted to sort of highlight this long list of different learning experiences, because even though I do teach, I learn all the time, and I don't think our learning is ever really over. Okay, so onto the practical stuff. So one of the things that I learned through the instructor training last year, which is based off of the training that the carpentries folks go through, is this idea of using a concept map. So a concept map represents a mental model, and it can be helpful to help teachers figure out what they're trying to teach, aid in communication between lesson designers. So if you're co-leading a workshop or you're teaching a course with another person, it can be really nice to work together on a concept map or share each other's concept maps, because more often than not, I guess I would say probably almost always, the concept maps are going to look different, even if both people have the same or think that they have the same idea about how to approach teaching a lesson. They may be drawing different connections and probably are drawing different connections between different things than yourself. And so it's really kind of illuminating to be able to compare your understanding and your mental model for something that you'd like to teach with someone else's, and then see where there's overlap and then where you can complement each other with the approaches that you are hoping to take. It also aids in communication with learners, and it can be really useful for assessment. So how do you develop a concept map? So the first step, and this is sort of very basic, but if you haven't developed a concept map before, what you would want to do just to start would be to pick a topic, something that you'd like to teach, and then write down 2 words that are associated with that topic, on a sheet of paper. And you draw a line between the words, and you label this line to explain how the words are related to each other. And then in order to make more connections and draw more ideas or concepts down on the sheet of paper, you might ask yourself, okay, what other things are related in the same way? What parts make up these other things? What would need to come before or after the concepts that I wrote down on the page? So in other words, what might I need to teach first in order to get to this step that I just wrote down? And I think one of the things that really stuck with me when I was learning about concept maps in the context of our education was, I think there are a few things. One is that concept maps really appeal to me as a learner because they help me figure out how things are connected, and it makes it easier and maybe more explicit for me to make the connections between these different topics, and I find that it helps cement the material in my mind. And then also as an educator, it can be a really great way to kind of give yourself guidelines so that you don't try to teach too much. I think there's a lot that can come into teaching R. We've already chatted a little bit today with our other 2 speakers, but also in the chat box about how there's different approaches to teaching R. There's a lot of different things you could do with R, and there's different ways to do the same thing. And it can be really tough sometimes as an educator to sort of narrow down the scope, because you can't sort of put this burden on yourself of teaching everything about a topic to your audience, because there are so many things. And so, like, where do you draw the line? And sort of help guide yourself in designing a lesson that is going to be helpful for the learners, but also ultimately helpful for you, so that you don't feel really overwhelmed with the amount of content that you're hoping to teach other people. So one of the whys about concept maps is that the average adult's short-term memory, or what's also called the working memory, can only hold about 7 items, give or take a couple items at a time. So short-term knowledge, like knowledge that you would receive now in the short term, makes it into long-term memory, like memory of things that you're going to hold on to and carry forward, only after it's held in short-term memory and then rehearsed. And too much information too quickly can mean that this new information ends up displacing the old information, so you don't end up retaining as much as you're hoping to. And a concept map can help ensure that a learner's short-term memory won't be overloaded. And you can learn a lot more about this in the Concept Maps chapter of the Teaching Tech Together book by Greg Wilson that Cass alluded to earlier. And it's linked on the slides. And I forgot to share a link to them, but I'll share a link when I'm done here. Okay, so in practice, what does this look like? So in practice, an educator can teach one subsection of the concept map at a time, and then provide an assessment. So when we're talking about holding something in short-term memory and then rehearsing it, it can be really helpful to sort of solidify that in short-term memory by having some kind of assessment that sort of gauges that. And so it could be live coding, it could be hands-on exercise, it could be kind of like little multiple choice questions or different kinds of are examples of what that could look like. And I provided a link to assessments in the book as well that you can read more about online. So what I have on the screen here is one example of what a concept map might look like. And this is for column names. And this particular concept map was sketched out by Emily Reederer, and it's linked in the bottom right of the slide. And so we can see here that it has columns over here as a concept, and then it's got a few other concepts that are sketched out in boxes. So a data frame has columns, or a data frame has names. And then if we look at columns, we see that it says columns have data types, columns have units, columns have meaning, and so on. So if we were to split this up, we might take one chunk to be the chunk that I've highlighted on the left, which has roughly 6 concepts. So it would have data frame, data types, units, meaning, columns, and then we could choose to include names because it's related to this data frame has connection. And then I counted roughly 3 connections. So the connection here of data frame has, and then I'm choosing to count this as one connection. So columns has 3 different concepts attached to it. And then on the right-hand side, names, should encode, and then data types, units, and meanings as another connection. So if you choose to interpret it this way, then you would come to that sort of 9 items, and that falls within the 7 items plus 2, or 7 plus 2 items. And then the next chunk that you might teach for this would be the chunk that I've highlighted on the right-hand side. So here we roughly have 3 different concepts. We could count validation, names, and documentation, and then there's a few different connections that link these different concepts together. And then I would have come to 8 items if I counted it this way. And so of course it depends on how you choose to connect your concepts, and it's entirely up to you how you want to split them up, but I really find, and it's recommended that you do teach in chunks of the concept map. And one of the things, I guess the last thing I'll say in terms of this being really helpful is that it at least for me, it can be really difficult to, like I was saying earlier, to know where to draw the line when you're teaching and like how much to teach. And doing the concept map as sort of this first initial step and sketching it out in like a really rough way gives you like a really nice overview of what it is that you'd like the learners to come away with. And then you can sort of work your way backwards and think, okay, well, what are the different things that would need to happen for students to be able to get to the end point, which is to complete a certain task or to create a certain product or a certain visualization or transformation of your data frame or what have you. And then it helps me keep track of, okay, well, I don't necessarily need to go into the nitty-gritty details about this particular thing if it's not really super pertinent to the path that I've sort of identified the learners would need to take to get to where I'd like them to get to. And so maybe I would choose to link to more information for that particular thing if there's like extra details that I know I won't have time to cover. Yeah, and I've also linked in this slide on the bottom here, I've got this link that says more data science concept maps, and that has a whole collection of different concept maps that different educators have created and have shared openly that you can look at for your own lessons or to get ideas about what it could look like for your own your own different concept maps.
Thank you, Sylvia, and to all of our panelists. So yeah, lots to think about. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay, welcome back, everyone. All right, so I think a good place to start is a question that was submitted through meetup.com, which is how can I start from the very beginning? And panelists, I'll just let you chime in rather than directing the questions at you individually. Yeah, so advice for getting started.
I guess, oh, Amma, did you want to, you can go ahead.
No, I was just turning my video back on.
Okay. I guess I would maybe start by saying that it maybe depends on where your coworkers are at. You know, are they people that are already familiar with some coding or not? I would say, sort of generally speaking, you can't go wrong, I would say, with recommending the R for Data Science book and maybe using that as a guide. And I mean, that's sort of I guess it depends on what the environment is. Whether if it's just teaching a coworker in your office, sort of side by side, then maybe something like what Cass was sharing earlier about pair programming would be a really nice way to teach coworkers. But I think it depends on the context for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like every context is different, and my department actually kind of, this is one of our mandates, is to teach like people throughout our institution R and data skills. And it's really complicated to do that because, you know, you can't, like, I think Sylvia has it exactly right, that individually versus on the group level versus on a wider level all take different strategies. What's worked for the well, what happened to us over the course of 3 or 4 years, even before I started with our supervisor Joy Payton, was to create an R user group and start from that perspective. So to have talks, have an R user group, and put up blog posts. And then, so this is perhaps maybe too big, but the idea here is like create a space where people can talk and understand that for a long time, a space like that, like you might have to be the fire in that space. So if you're thinking about a smaller department or a group, I might say start a regular meeting, maybe once a week, maybe it's check in about R. If there's enough interest there, and kind of try to get some structure there. And then once there's enough of a context, people starting to meet about it. I think that oftentimes our first experience of programming language, we do well if there's a workshop or an intensive. So there are sometimes what will happen with consultations in us is that we'll talk to somebody who's in a unit that maybe they're interested in R, but they're still trying to persuade everyone. And we'll say, okay, like first of all, what are the problems you have in your unit? Like, what are the things you want to solve? Like going to Anna's point around, like, this is all about solving problems and being creative and thoughtful about solving it. So like, what are the problems in your unit? How can, you know, what do you think, if people have a reluctance, what is some of the reluctance there? Like, are they using an old technology? What's going on? And then maybe helping frame that for them as, okay, maybe there can be a first workshop or an intensive or a Coursera course or a class that you can spend some time on. And then that becomes a context where people get those first experiences. And then once they have those experiences, they might then be ready to turn in and look at the problems at work. Like, oh, I have to make a dashboard or a visualization. I'm saying this a lot because I think this is a big task. If you're trying to change a group or an institution, it's possible, but it takes like thinking about time and kind of creating some regular structures and supports.
Yeah, I would definitely, agree and concur with what Sylvia and Kaz have shared. When it comes to the workplace, and any workplace, it really begins with, what structures are in place. Are your supervisors, supportive of, introducing this new sort of program or software? And I think it also comes from, collective interest, as Kaz shared. It's about what's not just best for what you're doing, but how can it help you solve a problem, right? And if it does, then it's a really great case that you can make for wanting to ensure that your supervisors or directors are going to be invested in your education for R or any other programming language for that matter. But I would agree, it definitely begins with structures and also thinking of incentives for yourself, right? So pretty much with every sort of projects that I've been on when it comes to learning something, whether if it's a new program or a new skill or a new method, I always think about, well, what am I also going to be getting out of it, and how can that help to elevate me as, you know, a researcher or as a data person? You know, all of those things together, I think, work to make a great case for not just teaching others R and programming languages, but also helping to further your own education in different types of programs like R.
Thanks, everyone. And I see we have a quick follow-up question for Cass, which is, how do you find the balance between instructing someone or facilitating them to learn on their own? And yeah, so I'll start with Cass, and Sylvia and Amma, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually goes great with that idea of understanding the real incentives, what a person in front of you really kind of needs to support them. Like, what are their actual goals? So I think that seeing really clearly, oftentimes people's goals are to solve a problem, but they're also to have a career that is stable, that maybe they have a path to progression, maybe to not feel threatened in their career, you know, like things like that. I mean, people, you know, everyday goals, right? And so I think that when it comes to instructing someone or facilitating them to learn their own. So I like to put on my librarian hat. Again, I never don't have my librarian hat on, but especially because when you're a librarian, sometimes you consult with people and sometimes you say, oh, let's come to my workshop. Sometimes you say, go check out this other resource. Sometimes you say, let's sit down one-on-one and break things down together. And I think that when it comes to supporting people to learn R, sometimes you're saying, come, like, I can teach you something literally, like maybe in a workshop environment, maybe in a pair coding environment. But one thing you can also do to help people is, one, help them break down, help them understand what their problems are, and maybe explain how coding could solve this. Like try to maybe break down, oh, so you want to bring data from here to there, like this is something coding is really good at. Let's talk about this together. So help them see the problem solving script and maybe through that develop some intuition, which can develop some motivation around this. But then also, again, think about trying to help that person, again, when they frame it that way, maybe advocate from their boss or supervisor to spend time on this. So you don't always have to like enlighten people from up on high with here's R, but sometimes you can be a supportive person because people often can't, I struggle with that too, like see the connection between programming language, which seems desirable, seems very difficult, and their everyday problems, which are urgent and meaningful, but it might not be clear like how to use a language to solve a problem. So sitting down with people and helping them frame their own problems in terms of languages and algorithms can be helpful.
Thank you. And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Agree with what Cass shared, and just also I think if it is more like an informal setting and you're trying to find that balance between instructing someone and facilitating them to learn on their own, sort of like outside of a planned workshop or course, I think it also helps to really like remind folks that we are all learner educators, you know, and not burden yourself with this idea that you have to have like all the knowledge or you have to like be always available to answer all the questions, but rather provide guidance. I guess if something seems like pretty specific, that's a good opportunity, I think, to sort of encourage people to, you know, explore the internet, do some searching and see what others have come up with as well. And then if you feel like you want to share your own approach to that particular problem, then that could be helpful too.
Thank you. And that's actually a great segue. So we have a few questions around the idea of asking questions. So Cass, I loved what you said about seeing asking questions as community work. And I think you know, something that can come up for I suppose newer members of the community is like overcoming a fear of like seeming uninformed. So I wondered whether Cass, you could respond to that a little bit, and Sylvia and Amma as well.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested how everyone would frame that. I guess, I think maybe the main thing is just truly programming, and actually, my friend and inspiration in this, Naomi Alterman, is here, I believe, and I will always credit her for saying that like programming is searching for questions on Google, but we don't actually teach how to do that. So it's really quite a glaring absence is how do you search for information? And so we all spend our entire careers coding or educating, searching for stuff. Like we're constantly doing that, and we don't always talk about how we do that. And so I guess I would just really reassure people that we all need questions. We all look on Stack Exchange and try to find a question that's closest to ours. It's always helpful to put something out there. And it's one of the key things we do. And it's one of the least valued things we do. So I get the feeling of being scared to be out there, but truly like this is what programming is asking questions. And by asking, you're participating in that culture. And I think that's really, really big. So just a huge encouragement to please keep asking, even if it feels vulnerable and kind of scary in some ways.
Absolutely. And I think I would add to that, another Twitter story. I spend way too much time on Twitter. One of the really, I think, interesting things about the fact that programming is ever evolving is that there are always new ways of coming up with doing things, right? And so I think not being afraid of being able to fail, which isn't something that's necessarily ingrained in most folks, is also something that's been really helpful, I think, for me and for other folks that I've worked with when it comes to programming, and in particular, learning different programming languages. And I also think to Kaz's point about, not talking about the fact that folks Google when they have an issue, right? Or they're looking for an answer, everybody Googles. In fact, as I was saying, another Twitter sort of exchange where senior developers and data scientists are going back and forth about, well, real senior, software developers don't Google. And then the data scientists were like, oh no, we really Google. And then finally they're like, okay, fine, we do Google, right? So it's one of those interesting things that we know everyone does, but no one likes to talk about it. But yet there are all these forums that exist. And, I would say take advantage of those forums, because if it's a question that you have, trust me, someone's thought of it, and the right keywords will save your bacon. And so learning how to not just think about the problem, but really think about what it is you're trying to solve and what outcome you're trying to achieve are two sort of key ways that have really helped me when thinking about, I have this problem, I'm not really sure how to solve it. Let me go find on a forum, if someone's already thought about this, or even just posting on a forum, and really don't be afraid to, ask a silly question, because there are no silly questions, right? And I think using those forums to your disposal is really important, because as I said, if it's a question that you have, it's a question that somebody else has. And so it's important to ask it.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick that if it is specifically, I'm looking at the question, if it's specifically when something goes wrong, that's often accompanied by some kind of scary looking error message. And I also see, I think in the chat box, someone suggested typing in a search engine like R and then what they want to learn. So what I've done is copy and pasted that error message right into the search bar. And almost always, I can't think of an example of when it hasn't been the case, that there's been somebody else who's already posted something about that error message. And I had one more thing to say about that, and tying into the last thing. Well, I don't remember. If it comes back to me, I'll share in the chat box.
I actually, that did make me think though, when you're talking about what you actually put into search, and I'm sorry, I answered your practical question, the initial question asker, in a very broad way. But Ahmed said earlier, the right keyword will save your bacon. And Sylvia, you're mentioning asking for the error, like searching for an error message. So just one really concrete thing is that when you have an error that you search for you to find the right results or a result that's relevant to you on Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, when you search for the error, you want to exclude everything that's specific to your problem. And usually that's like the variable name, and usually, or like the name that you named the table or the tibble or whatever, or something specific. And usually what you can do is when you go to the red part, error, blah, 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 usually there's a bunch of specifics about your code. And then there's like a colon, and then there's the explanation, like no X, no, this like wasn't an integer, was this character vector or something. And that's the piece that you're most likely to get the result on. So if you want to like really quickly ratchet up your success rates, combining what people said in the chat and Sylvia about making sure that you're searching for R, maybe R in quotes, and then making sure that you isolate just the piece that is general enough and looking through and being like, is this about my problem, or is this about my data, or is it general phrasing? Even if you can only get part of the error message because you're being conservative about what is specific or not, that'll actually improve your searching results like a bunch. So those are just some specifics.
Thank you. Really great. Okay, moving on to another popular question, and I think it would make sense to start with Anna, because you talked about encouraging active learning and play as part of your pedagogy. So how, when we're taking the role of teacher or instructor or educator, how do we come up with good active learning opportunities or examples? And I'll add to that how to encourage play.
Sure. So I think more broadly, when it comes to, active learning opportunities, if you're still in a sort of school setting, it's a little bit easier, right? You could take a course, you could do an independent study, which I've done, right? Or a mentor, or find a mentor who can work with you on a project, right? When it comes to the more traditional workplace outside of, let's say, a university setting or some type of K-12 setting, there are opportunities, for example, at libraries. There are opportunities where you can join forums like this, right, where you can get matched with a mentor or work with someone. And also there are a lot of opportunities online to join online forums and online groups where some of those individuals in those groups are actively participating in projects. So as an example, one group that I'm a part of is Statistics Without Borders, as an example. And so routinely what they'll do is, as a volunteer organization, oftentimes they'll have nonprofits or other type of volunteering organizations that want to be able to leverage their data in some way. They don't have the capacity for it. And so they'll put a call out to all the folks who are in the membership. And those are really great opportunities to sort of learn. When it comes to encouraging play outside of those domains, honestly, what I would say is grab a bunch of people who are really just interested in programming and R, and just create a group. I mean, pre-COVID, you could just, sit outside if it was a nice day and just sort of sit on your laptop and, just have fun and play. And so some of that, has been more formalized in the form of hackathons or datathons. And since everything's virtual, that's sort of an advantageous way of still getting a group or a community together. But I still think, depending on the type of learner that you are, some of those forums can seem a little bit intimidating. So as myself, as an example, I'm an extreme introvert. I really don't learn well in large group settings. And so I tend to do a lot of my active learning opportunities on my own, and that tends to work well for me as a researcher. But, I think it really just depends on, learning a little bit about yourself, how you learn, what it is you want to learn, and sort of thinking about what forum it is that you would like to learn in, whether if it's on your own, whether if it's with the group, whether if it's in a more formal institutional setting. But there are always lots of opportunities, both paid and unpaid, to both leverage your skills, upskill your skills, and just have fun. And yeah.
I think I'll think about this. I'm not sure if the perspective of the question asker is from the learner's perspective or the educator's perspective, but I'll offer that if you're an educator and you're trying to find an active learning opportunity for your learners, this could come up when you're delivering your lesson. If you're able to incorporate live coding, that can be a really great way for you to go kind of off-road or off-script and answer kind of questions as they come up, and sort of be able to tailor the lesson a little bit towards whatever it is that people are wanting to learn. And I find that people can get really engaged with the content that way.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. I think this is great. Maybe I'll just say that when it comes to like active learning and being like coding, being involved in session, I think there's been a little bit of a shift in terms of how people think about things like installing locally code in R and anything over time, because for a long time that was what you had to do. And then maybe over the last 10 or 15 years, like when I had been early learning coding and blah, 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 there was a time where it was still seen as really useful to like have that active experience of going and installing it locally, even if there was some cloud-based stuff. And I feel like only in the last couple of years, and I'd be curious what you all think, but I feel like now there's so much cloud infrastructure, and so RStudio Cloud is really advanced. There's lots of stuff that runs great, even if you're not running locally. And now that we're in a pandemic context, where I feel like a lot of instructors have decided that it's not worth it to deal with install hell, like in terms of sometimes that was historically seen as a way, it's like an important kind of rite of passage of programming, as we all suffer installing something. I think that was referenced in the chat at the very beginning. But now I think that's changed a bit. So I just mean to show too, just keeping an eye on what some of those norms and trends that are changing. I would have said it's still important to help people with that even a couple of years ago, but now I think that it's okay to maybe not lead with that as like that one of those first experiences of coding. So just a random piece of context.
Thank you. And for the question about favorite or most recommended R-related teaching or learning resources, I think the approach that we'll take to this question is to compile a list that we make available to everyone through our blog. But perhaps I'll give each panelist the opportunity just to mention one recommendation or favorite that you'd like to share with the group. And sorry, one more thing. Audience members, please feel free to chime in the chat as well with your favorite resources. And Sylvia, I'll let you go first.
This is a really tricky question to answer. I think broadly speaking, I wouldn't say there's like one very specific learning resource, but I do tend to follow people that teach R professionally because they create content for their students that they often share openly. So one of the people whose content I really appreciate is Minnie Shendenkaya-Rondell's work. And so I think if you're able to find an educator that is, kind of normally recommending or developing resources, I think that's a really nice place. And then in terms of how can learners find good projects to work on, I think that's also kind of a tricky one. I think for myself, I would say some of my most interesting learning has happened sort of on a project basis. So if there's something that I know I want to do, but I don't know how to do it, I find it's a really good motivator for me to learn something new. So I think that can be a very personal question in terms of what is it that motivates you, and Cass sort of mentioned that earlier, this aspect of motivation. But I think if people are able to find something that, oh, it'd be really cool to learn how to like scrape information off of a website or build a map, because there's some reason why that's important to them, that can be a really nice project.
And if you had to say one thing about, so recommend one resource, what would you say?
So I think, again, like Sylvia, I don't have one particular resource. I think for teaching or learning, part of I think the struggle there is everyone is so different in terms of their programming style that it's really up to you to decide and sort of pick and choose from a number of different resources. So as an example, sometimes, as we've talked about, when you run into an issue and you're just like, oh gosh, you know, what's going on? You just go over to Stack Overflow or Stacks Exchange, right? But other times, maybe you just want to get inspiration, which is sort of what Sylvia was talking about. And so another Twitter story, sorry, but I do a lot of data visualization work. And so Twitter and Instagram is where a lot of people will post their data visualization stuff. And so I could just find myself sort of scrolling on Twitter or Instagram and being like, oh, well, that looks really interesting. I want to learn how to do that. And so you, as Sylvia said, you'll follow someone and get to learn a little bit more about them and the type of work that they do. And so, and the same goes for teaching. I think I saw in the chat that folks were talking about Julia, right? So she's someone who I follow, and she's an educator, and I believe she's with our studio. And, you know, I think it's just one of those things where you have to actively be on the lookout for new things that interest you and thinking about new ways that you would like to use R. And I think naturally, there are different sort of channels that you can go through to find those people. And for the last part of that question, when it comes to good projects, so I'm a little bit biased on the project since I work at an institution of higher education. One of the things that I always try to do as someone who is an educator is I always try to have projects that I can have students be on, that I can mentor them, right? So they're learning something. And as Sylvia said, it's also a really great way for me to learn new things and get to play around with data all day. But I think if you don't have that opportunity, you can always, you know, speak with professors who tend to have a lot of projects and always are looking for RAs or data analysts on projects. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I'm now at 2 envelopes covered in notes. I also in the chat, I said that I'm all here for the half enthusiastic, half apologetic references to Twitter. I feel the exact same way. I mean, so I have a theory. I'm not sure if this is maybe works for everyone. I've realized it's true for me, which is, well, one, there's a lot of really kind people in the R world. Like, I'm really grateful for that. A lot of genuinely kind people with all sorts of perspectives, and it's really lovely. And I realized that for myself, I learn really well when I am like excited by the people I'm working with and feeling inspired by, I guess, like what they have to say. And I feel like, oh, cool. Like, I see what you do and it makes me like want to keep following, or it makes me want to try something. And so I think with Twitter, I use a lot. I think the core of it could be applicable to like the R Ladies communities, any community you're in, a university, which is, I would say, don't be afraid to be like, to have the thought process of, oh, you seem cool, I want to be like you, like the kind of elementary school or feeling. I think it actually applies a lot for learning, which is, I've learned a lot from realizing I like how someone like approaches things, how they think and express problems, and then being like, huh, I wonder what they do, like technically, I wonder what they do, and being like, oh, this person develops open source software. Like, oh, I didn't really know anything about R package development or had tried it until I heard people mention that enough in R Ladies groups and other groups, and I realized, oh, this is like a really neat thing that people take on when, you know, and it's complex, but they learn to do it, and they do it because they're trying to give back this kind of solution to the R community. I really would love to do that one day. That's like a goal I've set for myself. I haven't authored my own R package yet, but that has kind of set in my mind a sense of, oh, it would be great to talk to people and be able to say, hey, I'm working on my R package. That would seem fun, you know. Certainly with critical data, with you know, I also love data visualization. Like, you know, you kind of you connect to, and it's not just like personality. I guess I mean that sometimes people sharing a similar orientation towards like their values and what they're investigating, I think can really ground what you do. And so to answer your again, I'm being too general, I'm sorry, to answer your practical questions, is that those are the people I end up paying attention to, and it's on Twitter, I apologize. And then I end up seeing what they're working on, or, you know, and one very specific example that came from that is the Tidy Tuesday project. because that's something people do. It's a data set that's released once a week on Tuesdays, and people will visualize it and explore it. And that's kind of this own little microculture within R, is people doing Tidy Tuesday examples. So I'll put a link to in the chat. But I came to that because I noticed people who I thought were kind and I liked their values and their approach were sharing visualizations they were doing. And then the person who runs that project is a great RStudio person, etc. So that's kind of, yeah, I don't know if that works for everyone, if that's a certain kind of being social that doesn't click for everyone, but if that works for you, I would recommend being excited about people and learning that way.
Thank you. Looks like our next question is, what is something that an R instructor has said or done that's made you feel more comfortable when going through the learning process? And I think, Sylvia, I'll direct that at you to begin with. Thank you.
Sure, I love this question. I would say, I think sort of solidly in my mind, I have this memory of participating in this workshop, this art workshop, and the instructor was just very clear on, these are the slide decks, and here's the exercise files for what we're going to do, but also here's the solutions folder that has all the exercises filled in. Participate as you want throughout this workshop, like no pressure. If you don't get it right away, don't worry, you can come back to it. And this was all sort of I think it was in April of last year, so during quarantine times. And I just remember feeling like, okay, it's like they sort of gave me permission to not stress out in the moment about learning everything that I could that was happening like right then. Yeah, definitely helped me feel comfortable going in.
So again, I did the Recurse Center recently, which is more of a peer learning model. So people can lead workshops and teach them. And Julia Evans, who's a data education person, makes a lot of like comics about computing and Linux, was in the group, and she's a very talented educator and just a really interesting person. And I'd never seen her, I'd never been in a group with her or had been part of like a workshop live with her. And one thing that I really, really loved about how she taught was that she was teaching, it was the idea of like containers in Linux, which I've not really messed with before. It was a new thing, but she taught it, again, I guess this is partly why I mentioned the idea of, you can teach your curiosity, not just your expertise, because she kind of had a hypothesis, and she was like, hey, come to this group if you want to see me try to set up containers in this way, and we'll see how it goes, and we can talk it out. And I don't think this is appropriate for every kind of learning. I think that sometimes that's a little bit too ramshackle, and it's going to be too confusing. But I like the idea that you can create an event around, hey, I have a theory. Do you want to check it out with me? And that made me feel like we were all equals in that space. And I really, really, really appreciate when people can signal that we're all equals in a learning environment. That there's a basic respect, that it's not just I have to be quiet because there's information being transmitted, but there can be, even if I don't speak up, I feel like my curiosity is somehow a little more on the same level as this person who's leading something, because she's already signaled that it might fall apart, it might not work. So I thought that was a creative way to bring us all together and make us all feel like we were part of something.
I think I would second that. I think my two favorite experiences with an R instructor or an instructor that was teaching R was one where they literally were like, let's all, fail together. Like, let's, try something and see if it works, great. If it doesn't, whatever. And then my second one, which I think I've used even in some of my courses now, it's like, let's crash R, where like I actively try to either, break R or have it, spit out as many warning messages. And part of that is just because I think, again, as someone who's trained in like the social and behavioral sciences, we're sort of taught like, you know, things have to be exact and almost sort of perfect. Whereas in engineering, it's like, oh yeah, let's tinker all day. And so I try to infuse that in my courses, where it's like, no, it's probably not going to work and it's totally fine. And I'm just going to sit here and Google if it doesn't work because I have no idea what this warning message means. And I love those types of instructors, because it's one of those moments where you realize like, oh yeah, they're human and we'll just figure it out all together. And I think it's just, you know, when you're on the teaching end, it can be a little daunting at first because you're like, oh God, I don't know the answer. But then over time you realize, oh yeah, I don't know the answer. And so what, you know, I can figure out the answer. So I think for me, that's what's really made me more comfortable. And it's something that I apply in my own teaching to other students that makes them more comfortable with learning R. And just being more comfortable with the idea even of programming, because I think oftentimes even just throwing that word out, people are just very much like, oh, programming, this is so hard. And it's like, no, it's just sitting around and, you know, writing a bunch of stuff and then seeing if it works. So I think, yeah, that's what's been most helpful.
Thank you. And Cass, I did see we have a follow-up question about the Recurse Center that you just mentioned. So how can we find out about communities or opportunities like these, where I guess there's opportunity to learn and develop? Like, how do we find these communities?
Yeah, so that specific community is, if you go to recurse.com, I don't want to like show for it, but like it basically is like you can do a 6-week or 12-week batch or a 1-week batch actually. So that is you go through an application process, and it's really quite interesting. I love that question because I don't know that much about other spaces like that, and I would like there to be more. That's very much of interest. I think that data hackathons and hackathons like we were talking about at the beginning, I think that can be a really powerful environment. And I would say that there's a spectrum of people have different experiences in hackathons, and there's different, you know, depending on how they're approached. And I would say definitely I think that one sounds great. And for me, so I would say be open to joining in on something like that, like an event, a deep dive. And what makes it powerful and successful often, what I found, is if it seems like there's a real partnership with an organization and it's what you're doing is of service. And because sometimes that can be like maybe in theory what the goal is, oh, we want to solve X problem, but there's not a way in which people are actually being brought to the table, and there's not a sense of service. And then as a result, people can kind of go in all directions, and it can be more of a mixed experience. And perhaps I can discuss a criticism of neoliberalism and capitalism another time. But in some of these groups, though, there are really, I've been really impressed with Our Ladies in Code for Philly and like different groups here in Philadelphia who seem to really bring those groups to the table. And then as a result, you get the benefit, as Ann was speaking about earlier, of having this real, authentic, domain-specific experience. And it's also like an environment where it's truly supportive, where you're kind of seeing a through line of the data to your work, you know, to impact, and you can contribute even if you're at, you know, at whatever point, at whatever point of your knowledge, at the beginning of your journey, you can still join the group and help with documentation, you know, be a fly in the wall, help organize things, you know, it's very effective. So I think I'm explaining it that way because I don't think every hackathon environment is equal. And I think there can be big issues with those, but I think that can be a great, a similar type of immersive experience where you make these kind of close connections and there can be some teamwork there. I don't know if folks have other thoughts about those types of intensives.
I mean, I think I'll echo that that point specifically about like doing something that's sort of like in service of something larger or some sort of larger mission, I think can be a really great motivator. One of my communities of practice is the MyR community, or a community for minority R users. And within MyR, there's like different like committees. There's like one that's dedicated to the website, and if you want to get involved or like learn about how to make a website, you can join that committee. There's like another committee about accessibility, and we have a lot of different things that we're sort of working on in there. And you know, and I think these are all, it all feels really nice to be like contributing in some way to something that's bigger than yourself. So that's been really a really nice community filled with opportunities for me.
Thank you. So sadly, we need to start thinking about wrapping up. So I think we have time for one or two more questions. I will say that there are a lot of questions that folks have submitted about resources, particular interest in the concept maps, Sylvia, that you reviewed, and resources for those. So what we'll do is collect those links, and we'll make those available to everyone in the blog that will accompany this meetup. So look out for that. Yeah, as we sort of wrap things up, let me see. Okay, there's a sort of bigger picture, more open-ended question for each of our panelists, which is what is next for you in terms of our education? And I'll start with Alma.
Oh gosh, I was gonna say, can I go last? So I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by our education, right? So to me, education is both teaching and learning, I guess. And so in terms of teaching, I think for me in the next at least year or so, I intend to do more R workshops, and in particular, sort of specialize or help focus on folks who do work in the areas that I do some work in, specifically because oftentimes folks who are in the sort of social policy arena have a hard time sort of wrangling their data and sort of figuring out ways to sort of make insights with it, and then, you know, really capture moments. And then I think on the learning end of the spectrum for myself, I think I always sort of every year have this tradition where I learn something new, and it could be a new sort of program, it could be a new sort of package. And so since we've been on lockdown, have been doing that almost, you know, on a monthly basis. So I'm going to continue to do that, where I'll sort of learn a little bit more about text mining, which has been my sort of thing this year. So yeah, I think that's what's next for me in terms of our education, both the teaching and learning side.
Thank you. Sylvia?
I think, you know, I kind of like the education as it's shown up so far for me, sort of doing our workshops with our ladies or with other groups. That all feels good. I really am enjoying the flexibility that comes with that. I think it can be challenging from what I hear to find sort of like professional teaching sort of opportunities, and also have a lot of flexibility sometimes. And I think I'm at a point where I really enjoy having the flexibility. And, you know, honestly, I also don't have that much time. So I can't sort of dedicate, I can't dedicate too much to the teaching at the moment anyway. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. It's making me think. I feel like that part of my brain has been slowly burnt out by the last year. But no, I think honestly, I've realized that I had been delaying as an educator, maybe pursuing the part of writing code and working on software and analysis that was exciting for me. So I love the idea of a theme for a year. I think that for me, open source development has been that, where what I mean to say is that I realize a part of me wants to just sprint ahead and try with open source projects, whether or not I succeed, you know, whether or not I can even bring it back to my work as an educator. I feel the need to kind of focus on that for a little bit. So I think with education, though, I would really like to demystify what open source is, because I think as someone who really loves, again, like non-hierarchical spaces, spaces that are collaborative, community spaces. I see the open source landscape as being like a tremendous space that people work together and build really cool stuff. And also one of the parts of software or learning to code that is the most unclear and the most like, oh, you can do this, but secretly, how do you do this? And so maybe developing some resources for people like myself and for others who maybe they do want to come and make a pull request to a popular R project, or even just learn what those things mean, and they haven't been given a chunk of that yet to get them there. So I'm going to focus on my own coding bliss first, and then and maybe that's selfish, I don't know, and then I'm going to process that and then try to figure out how to share that with other people. But I think that's my brain's got for right now. Yeah.
Thanks. Exciting. Okay, and a final question for the evening, and again, it's quite a broad one. How can I gain experience teaching R? And Sylvia is smiling, so I will pass the mic to her.
Well, I'm smiling because I would say maybe talk to Our Lady's Philly. You know, I'm sure they would love to have you practice your teaching in this space. And they're lovely organizers. They're really wonderful to work with, like very organized, which is super nice. And yeah, I would encourage everybody to consider that sort of sharing whatever you feel like sharing in an Our Lady's workshop, but specifically Our Lady's Philly is wonderful.
Yeah, if there are ways to volunteer as a TA, if you see someone at your workplace or a colleague working on something, and if you can help that way, that can be huge. Yeah, and I think just seeing where the conversations happen around in your communities around teaching, and just perking up and seeing, oh, so it sounds like, yeah, like there's a workshop once a month, and getting a sense of that. I think that there are a bunch of roads in, and I think that the role of the instructor in the front of the room is one that, if you want to pursue that role, there are also the carpentries and our instructor certification. Those are kind of the gold standards of the certification kind of programs that each have their own like intensive trainings. But if that's one route for you, but another route is to just help and see how you can be of use to people doing education around you.
Yeah, I would echo all of those things. And I would also add, blogging is also a really great way to gain experience teaching, and vlogging as well. And so I say this, of course, laughing that I don't actually blog about R currently, because I deal with it so much in my work. I told myself my blog is my own personal stuff. I don't want no R, but I'm thinking of possibly changing that. But I think, being able to write about R and vlog and or have videos is something that I've seen as an increasing trend. And, particularly because we're all indoors, there's a greater reach that you can have, right? And also it's a little bit, well, not a little bit, it's a lot more low cost, as well as, you get to sort of decide what the content will look like, what it is you'll sort of talk about. And it's also just a great way to help yourself think through some of the questions that you have and just sort of put it out into the etherverse. And again, another Twitter plug, I'm sorry, on Twitter or whatever sort of social media platform, I swear I do not work for Twitter, that you're on, and just grow your community and connect with other folks who are really interested in some of the things that you're interested in. So I would just add the blogging and vlogging aspect to what both Sylvia and Cass shared.
Thank you. Yes, so it's time for us to wrap up, but thank you so much to Sylvia, Alma, and Cass. It's been really thought-provoking, insightful and motivating as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing your ideas and your time, and also thank you to the audience for chiming in with recommendations and engaging in the discussion and asking questions. we were recording the meetup, so we will put the recording up on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. And as I already mentioned several times, we'll also have a blog post to accompany that, which is going to round up some of the resources that have been recommended. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. This was great. It's fun to talk to you all.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Very nice chatting with everyone. Bye.